whenever you measure the lifetime, this inverse of lifetime is related to some of these two relaxation rates. So the radiative relaxation rate doesn't depend on the temperature. It's independent of temperature. Whereas this non-radiative relaxation depends on the temperature. If you heat the material, this factor increases. When this factor increases, the lifetime decreases. Okay? So that is the concept of time temperature sensing. So that's what we are going to use. So for that purpose, this is what we are doing. So we kept the sample here, see this little gap inside, we keep the sample. This whole thing is in this tube furnace. We turn the power on, so you heat it. So depending on this goes only 1000 degrees, so you can heat the material up to 1000 degrees. And there are two holes here, so you send laser beam through that. You excite that particular radar diode. So you are collecting light here, then you send it to spectrometer to make the light. So that's what we all set up. So basically here, so if this is erbium doped glass, so this particular level comes down, it emits green light. That's what you see mostly from erbium doped material. If this drops down to this level, you see infrared light. So some of this population in this level relaxes non-radiatively in this level because of the gap and the host material that is involved. So population here relaxes radiatively as well as non-radiatively. Whenever you heat this material, this mechanism is going to increase. When this mechanism is going to increase, the lifetime of this level is going to decrease. So that's what exactly we do. And then we'll develop a calibration plot. So when you do that, this also can happen. See here, these two levels are close by. So let's say there is some population in this level, because the other level is also close by due to something called Boltzmann distribution. The upper level is also populated, and because this gap is small, the population in the upper level stays there so long as the population in the lower level stays there. So if you measure the lifetime, you get the same value for both, but if you increase the sample temperature, because more and more ions are in this level, so the emission will increase. So this is shown in the next slide here. So that quarter does 3/2 population decreases, the intensity is decreasing with temperature. This population increases, you see that it's slightly increasing. So that's exactly what happens. So to estimate the temperature, there are two ways at this stage. You can measure the lifetime of this level, that's one way. The other way is you can measure this population ratio of this emission to that. So that means you take the ratio of this to that. You can, by plotting a graph of the population ratio versus temperature, you can extract the, you can develop a calibration plot and then use it for temperature sensing. Or by measuring this lifetime as a function of temperature, you plot a calibration plot and then you can use it for temperature sensing. So that's one of the things. So this was done in some PGT glass, and it was done with a pulsed laser, dye laser. So the lifetime you see WH11/2 quarter equivalent, they show the same value. The reason being, this gap is small. So this level population sustains so long as there is population here. So that's why you see those values are same. This is another level, lower level, it has a different value. So you measure this level lifetime as a function of temperature, you will get some graph. And here these are how the intensity is decaying as a function of time. The x-axis is time, the intensity. Whenever you increase the temperature, this is decaying much faster. So by fitting an exponential function to this, you can extract the lifetime. So you can plot a graph here. So it is decreasing linearly, but when you look at this graph, this relation doesn't tell you exactly what type of relation you expect because of this kind of nature. This M is another complicated function. So what Indu did is she took the inverse relation. That's what she did. She took logarithmic tau and she took the previous math and she rearranged it. You got another relation. So that means if you plot logarithmic lifetime versus 1/t, you will get a straight line whose slope is that. varies linearly. So that means this is an empirical relationship came up with variation of logarithmic light target inverse temperature basically that varies linearly. In addition to that, there are various other phenomena that happens inside a material. There is something called phonon-assisted radiative transition. Whenever an electron jumps from higher level to lower level, no other phonon is involved, you say it's an electronic transition. Sometimes it will be combined with a phonon, then you say phonon-assisted transition. That probability increases with temperature. So this is another competing mechanism. Then you have something called, this is the one mainly we are using for lifetime sensing. See, there is something called thermal population of nearby levels, and then you have ion-ion coupling inside. So those phenomena will complicate the measurement. Sometimes you expect linear variation is other, something else we have. So those are some other things that can frustrate you. So in principle, though we demonstrate this up to 1000, you can use it up to 1900 because the melting point is 1940 meters per year. That means yttrium, aluminum, garnet. But many people they just call it yak, the symbol. And whenever you want high sensitivity, that means by changing temperature a little bit, you want a large change in lifetime, then use smaller energy gap and larger phonon phases. Or you want a broad temperature range, I need one material that can measure temperature from, let us say, room temperature to 1800 degrees. Then you have to choose a material in which the energy gap is large and phonon frequency is small. So like that, you can choose different host materials and use it as a temperature sensor. Whether a given material is useful or not, it depends on the energy level structure, the phonon structure, and the electron phonon coupling constant, because these things decide how fast the non-radiative relaxation is going to. So this is for applications where your conventional techniques fail. So you can use this for the temperature measurement or for locket or in corrosive environments. So I'm going to show another example, energy up conversion. This is used mainly for laser development. See, nowadays you have diode lasers, they are compact. Okay, they emit in the infrared region, or 800 nanometers, that's a common diode nowadays. You can use those compact diodes and pump these ions, and you can build green, blue, and red lasers. So that's where you have this energy up conversion that's handy. So that's one of the popular mechanisms, and these phenomena are very efficient also. Sometimes you get 50% efficiency or more. That means you have a 1 watt infrared laser, you will get half a watt green laser. So that's why this energy up conversion is a popular mechanism for changing light from infrared to visible. So people mainly in the laser market, they use this phenomena. So the basic science-wise, what happens inside the material, there may be a sequential excitation of 2 or 3 step excitation. Let's say you want to take something to the top floor. Let's say you have to take a rock and throw it. You don't have energy, you can throw it from the ground floor to the next floor. If there is another person there, you can throw it to the next floor, like that, right? Then you have something called stepwise excitation. Or if you have somebody who is energetic, you can throw it all the way from ground floor to the third floor. That then becomes only single step excitation. When we use infrared lasers, so what you need is a sequential 2 or 3 photon excitation. That's what you make. And you can also use energy transfer up conversion. What happens is here, if you have 2 ions side by side, ions are charged particles, right? So then there is going to be Coulomb interaction between neighboring ions. So then you have something called energy transfer interaction. So if you have a dipole and a dipole, then you say dipole-dipole interaction. That will transfer energy from one ion to the other ion, non-radiative. It's not a phonon process. Just one ion will transmit its energy to the other. And that's called energy transfer process. Or there is something called avalanche absorption. So this is different from this, but it is also due to coupling between 2 ions. So I'm going to show you some examples. All these phenomena, they contribute to the development of green or blue lasers. So that's why these are very popular techniques in laser development.
But I think this laser pointer doesn't involve the conversion.
This is red beam, right? It's a diode probably.
No, this is green.
Yeah, this is green. I don't know what they have inside. So nowadays, gallium nitride and other stuff. You can manipulate the energy gap. You get all kinds of. I don't think that the upconversion problem. See, in the beginning, upconversion was a popular thing, but later on, the semiconductors were developed. Things like this, they use the diodes. Whenever you need high power lasers, they use this phenomena. Okay, that's good. So why do we need upconversion laser? It facilitates laser development with compact lasers using fibers. It only uses diode pumping because diodes are compact, and that's where we have high power diodes. So you can take advantage of the high power diodes, then you can convert 50% and you can generate into green. Because most of the energy levels they permit 2 or 3 photon excitation. In the beginning I showed you the errors. You have cluster of levels. The energy gaps will be equal, but the sum of those ions stepwise. So that's why it facilitates stepwise 2 or 3 photon. And also they emit UR visible radiation. Sometimes people are talking of white light emission. For example, they want to change all the street light diodes. White light LEDs. Okay? Use the regular sodium lamps or mercury lamps, they consume a lot of power. You want to cheap everything nowadays. Everybody is talking of energy conservation. So nowadays that's what they are talking of, white light LEDs. Again, they use lasers to develop those white light LEDs. That means you pump them with infrared light, they emit white light. These mechanisms. So how do you get white light? Whenever you say computer screen, you look at this RGB, red, green, blue, right? So these rare earth ions, when you shine with infrared light, due to this mechanism, they are red light, green light, blue light. When you have that mixture, it doesn't look those individual colors, it looks white. That's what happens. In fact, some other materials we work in the lab, they do facilitate that purpose, white light. That's another commercial way nowadays. Okay, that's one of those things. So because the efficiency is also very high. So most of them they are for commercial development. That's why this is a good market. So these are basic physics wise. Wherever you see a reference, that means we did it in our lab at A&M. So that's what they mean. It's not that I'm not using somebody else's book. Wherever you see that, that means it has been done at A&M. Okay. So here, this is the basic science wise. So let's say you have some levels, you shine infrared light, it takes from here to here. Again another photon of the same infrared light will take it from here to here. Then that will emit from here to here. You get, see, let's say this is 800 nanometer, this is 800 nanometer, it emits from here to here, it will be 400 nanometer. Okay? Because wavelength, when it decreases, the energy increases. So that's what it is. So this is stepwise excitation. So let's say here you take diode, you excite 2 ions side by side. As I mentioned earlier, due to electrostatic coupling, when these are close by, the interaction efficiency is high. So this ion, which is in the excited state, transfers its energy to this. When that happens, this will suddenly goes up, then it emits from there to here. That's another process used in designing efficient lasers. And how do you know whether it is this mechanism or this mechanism? You measure the lifetime of this photon. When you do that, if it is a stepwise mechanism, even if you use a nanosecond pulse, these two processes have to take place within the nanosecond. So then if you measure the lifetime, it just becomes exponential. You don't see any other delay. That's how you know this is happening. If this is a coupling between the two, if you measure the lifetime of this photon, this lifetime depends on the lifetime of this level, that level, and this level. These 3 levels lifetimes are involved. You have to do some math, you need to have something called the rate equation model and simplify it. So then you will know what should be the delay. So that delay corresponds to tied up with these lifetimes. So that's how you know if this mechanism is taken. There is something called photon avalanche. It's not these two, but this also you need 2 ions. So what happens is whatever light you are shining here, it does not